Viktor was an artisan. His craft was not of stone and mortar, nor of leather and thread. He worked with the invisible strands of directives, weaving them into functional patterns, living tapestries that executed the client's will. Some tapestries counted grain in granaries, others regulated water flow in pipes, and still others displayed faces from thousands of miles away. But Viktor himself had long ceased creating anything new. He was a mender, a patcher of holes in others' worn-out tapestries, crafted by masters whose names had faded from memory. His days were spent unraveling others' mistakes, wandering through the shadowy labyrinths built by forgotten minds. Pride, that quiet worm, had gnawed at him for years. He knew he was capable of more. In his mind, the blueprint of a cathedral was maturing, a colossal, perfect construct of pure thought that would function not as a crude mechanism, but as a living, breathing creation. Yet, instead of building his cathedral, day after day he meticulously picked at others' crooked walls, patching cracks and cursing the incompetence of his predecessors. One particular knot tormented him, a dense, malignant tangle of threads at the very heart of an ancient system. It had been left by someone either brilliant or mad. For weeks, Viktor circled this knot, pulling one thread only to see 10 others tighten. The knot seemed to have a life of its own, resisting, mocking his vanity. Viktor felt like a blind man, feeling the body of a colossal, invisible beast. Despair grew thick, like silt at the bottom of a well. One day, rummaging through clutter in an old cabinet left by someone nameless, he found a small casket. Inside, on faded velvet, lay a fragment of black stone, smooth as frozen night, polished to a mirror sheen. It was heavy and cold. Viktor brought it to his face, but saw no reflection. The stone was blind to his skin, his eyes, to the tired lines around his mouth. It reflected only emptiness. Disappointed, he tossed it onto the table next to his blueprints and once again plunged into thoughts of the cursed knot. He closed his eyes, mentally tracing the threads, trying to imagine their path, their logic, their root cause. He constructed fragile diagrams in his mind, which immediately collapsed under their own weight. Opening his eyes, he casually glanced at the black stone, and froze. In its impenetrable depths, like constellations on a moonless night, thin lines of light flared. They were not reflections. They were born from within the stone. The lines curved, intersected, pulsed, precisely replicating the invisible construct that currently resided in his mind. But here, in the mirror, it was clear and laid bare. He saw not the consequence, but the cause. Not the knot, but every thread that had created it. He saw the error, one single incorrectly laid thread around which, like a cancerous growth, this entire intricate tangle had developed. His breath hitched. This was impossible. He looked away, shook his head. He thought of something simple, the tree outside his window. A glowing framework of a tree immediately appeared in the stone, from its roots to the finest twigs in its canopy. He thought of the knot again, and its complete, unerring map once more flared in the mirror. The mirror was blind to the world of flesh, but perceptive to the world of thought. Viktor's hands trembled. He stared at the stone, and a cold elation, like a snake's bite, coursed through his veins. He did not ponder the nature of the object. He saw in it only a tool, a perfect tool that gave him sight where he had always been blind. An hour later, the knot was unraveled. His fingers moved with a surgeon's precision, following the map etched in the black mirror. He didn't just cut the knot. He unraveled it, thread by thread, transforming chaos into pristine order. When the work was done, he locked the stone away in a desk drawer. No one must know. This was his advantage. His vengeance for years of humiliating mending. That evening, for the first time in a long while, he felt no fatigue. He felt power. He retrieved old sketches of his cathedral, a structure that had seemed insurmountable. He placed the black stone before him and allowed his mind to touch the grand design. And in the frozen night of the obsidian, the outlines of arches and spires of pure light began to emerge. He no longer unraveled others' knots. He began to weave his own web, and the mirror was his silent, all-seeing spider. The cathedral grew. For weeks, Viktor did not leave his room, subsisting on bread and water, oblivious to the passage of day and night. His world narrowed to 2 points: the design in his mind and its flawless reflection in the black surface of the stone. He was no longer an artisan. He was a demiurge, creating a universe from the primal chaos of his own thought. Every arch of his cathedral was pure logic, every spire an undeniable conclusion. He felt his consciousness expand, becoming as vast and complex as his creation. Pride no longer gnawed at him. It had become the load-bearing structure of his identity. News arrived with the morning wind, carried by the chatter of neighbors beneath his window. the city council had commissioned the construction of the Great Bridge, a colossal connective thread that would link the old quarters with new lands across the river. It was the work of the century, a feat that would etch the master's name into history, and the name everyone spoke was not his. The job had been given to Mark. Viktor knew Mark. He was his complete opposite. Not an architect, but a stonemason. His creations were crude, ponderous, devoid of grace. They worked, yes, but they worked like an ox, not like a bird. There was no thought in them, only raw, primitive strength. And now this craftsman, this builder of granaries and dams, was entrusted to create a symphony he couldn't even hear. Contempt in Viktor's soul was cold and sharp, like a shard of ice. For several days, he tried to forget about it, fully immersing himself in the construction of his inner cathedral. But the thought of Mark, of his undeserved glory, was like a drop of poison in clear water. It clouded his perfect designs. He saw ugly growths of another's success appearing on the flawless light threads of his creation. He could not create while such blatant imperfection existed in the world. One night he sat at his table and placed the black stone before him. He did not think of his cathedral. He thought of Mark's bridge. In the obsidian's depths, a glowing skeleton immediately appeared. It was exactly as Viktor had imagined it. Squat, devoid of grace, with thick, ugly supports. But it was sturdy. Devilishly sturdy. Viktor studied it for hours, mentally tracing every beam, every tie rod. He sought an error, a flaw, a crack in the design, but there were none. The bridge was ugly, but flawless in its crude strength. And then a new thought was born in Viktor. A thought that came not from the pride of a creator, but from the arrogance of a judge. If there was no error, one had to be created. He had no intention of breaking anything. That would be crude, in Mark's style. His design was more subtle. He would find one single point, the nerve center of the entire structure, its core, and he would plant a seed of decay within it. Not an error, no. He would weave a new thread into the pattern, a thread that would appear correct, that would serve as a support, but which, under a specific, precisely calculated load, would change its property, which from stone would turn to sand. He found that spot. The central arch, its keystone, the point where all lines of force converged. In the mirror, it shone brightest of all. Viktor closed his eyes. He envisioned this thread, perfect, smooth, indistinguishable from the others. He wove it into the glowing framework, like a surgeon implanting a poisoned thread into a living heart. Nothing changed in the black mirror. The bridge still looked indestructible. But Viktor knew. He had embedded within it the soul of destruction. He had created a mechanism that would one day activate with the inevitability of clockwork. He hid the stone and, for the first time in many weeks, went to sleep. He slept deeply, without dreams, as gods sleep after the creation of the world. 3 months passed. The construction of the bridge was nearing completion. The city buzzed with anticipation. Viktor remained silent. He had finished his cathedral. He stood in its shining halls, in the absolute silence of his mind, feeling like its sole deity. He no longer cared for the outside world. He had proven all he intended. On the day the bridge was opened, it rained. A downpour such as hadn't been seen in decades. The river swelled, turned black, dragging uprooted trees with it. Thousands of people gathered on both banks to see the first cart cross the new path. The city elders, Mark himself, proud and drenched to the bone, stood in the center span. Viktor watched this from his window. He felt neither schadenfreude nor anxiety, only the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a predictable experiment. The load reached its critical point. The roaring torrent of water, the weight of hundreds of onlookers, the heavy carts, all converged. He did not hear a crack. He saw. The central arch, its keystone, shining in his memory, turned to dust. The bridge did not collapse. It folded. Silently, smoothly, almost gracefully, as if bowing to the river. The stone spans entered the water, raising a wave that swept the crowd from the embankments. Screams drowned in the roar of the water. Viktor looked at the black river, carrying away debris and bodies. He did not think of Mark. He did not think of the dead. He thought of one crystal clear thing. His calculation was correct. The city did not sleep for 3 nights. The silence, which had once been the backdrop to Viktor's thoughts, was replaced first by screams, then by weeping, and then by a heavy, thick silence of grief. Fragments of conversations reached him, about children swept away by the river, about widows beating against the embankment stones, about Mark's name now uttered with either pity or contempt. Viktor remained untouched by it. This was the noise of the outside world, interference. irrelevant to the purity of his inner design. He waited it out as one waits out a storm, knowing the sky would clear sooner or later. When the world outside his window finally quieted, reduced to the monotonous whisper of rain, Viktor decided to return to his cathedral. He was tired of the imperfection of flesh and stone. He yearned to once again see the flawless lines of light, to walk through halls where every arch was proof of his righteousness. He took out the casket, removed the stone black as frozen sin, and placed it on the table. He closed his eyes and thought of his creation, of the central nave, of stained glass windows of pure geometry, of the spire ascending into the infinity of thought. He opened his eyes, anticipating the familiar radiance. The stone was black, but in its depths, there was no light. Darkness teemed there. Viktor peered closer. These were the same threads, but they were diseased. They no longer shone with a steady, cold light. They writhed, pulsated with a dull, crimson light like severed veins. They intertwined not into graceful arches, but into tangles resembling nests of frenzied snakes. He recognized them. These were the lines of force from the bridge. But now, other threads were woven into them, thin, frayed, quivering like spiderwebs in the wind. There were thousands of them. He understood. These were them. The people. The mirror, which had once reflected only the skeleton of design, now showed the flesh that had grown upon it. Each quivering thread was a life, severed by his calculation. He saw not just a construct, but all its pain. He saw a thread that was the scream of a mother who had lost her child. He saw a knot that was Mark's last breath under the weight of the stone. He saw intertwining strands that were the panic of the crowd, swept into the black water. He recoiled in horror. He tried to clear his mind, to think of something simple, like he had with the tree. He thought of the cup on his table. In the mirror, its glowing framework appeared, but from it, like grotesque tendrils, the same crimson, suffering threads grew. They entwined around it, suffocated its form, turning it into another knot of pain. The mirror no longer reflected his thought. It reflected the consequences. It had learned the most terrifying thing from him. It had learned to weave destruction into any construct. Viktor locked the stone in the drawer, but now he saw the threads even without it. Closing his eyes, he saw not darkness, but a crimson, writhing tapestry. His inner cathedral, his sanctuary, was defiled. The spectral threads of the deceased had grown through its shining walls, like poisonous ivy. His flawless arches were now arches of weeping. His spires pointed not to the sky, but into the abyss of another's death. He could no longer create. Any thought, any attempt to create order was instantly infected by the chaos he himself had spawned. He had wanted to build a perfect world, but he had let the rot of reality into its foundation, and now this rot had devoured everything. He was a god of a world composed of one single, unerringly calculated error. And this world was now trapped within him. He could not die, could not go mad, could not forget. He was condemned to eternally contemplate his creation, a perfect mechanism of agony where every detail functioned flawlessly. His calculation was correct, and that was his curse.